You could easily spend 30 odd hours in Dying Light 2's first area and walk away happy without even realising there's another bigger map to find and explore. So yeah, it's big. Techland might have tried to backtrack when people reacted badly to the promise of a game that would take 500 hours to 100%, but this is absolutely that game. I eventually rolled credits around 80 hours in with a ton of side stuff under my belt, but feeling like I'd barely dented it in places. Right now I'm probably 100 hours in, mopping up stuff and exploring a few bits of foggy map I've barely touched. So it's a big game, and for the most part, a good one. There are some issues I'll get to later, but nothing that puts me off recommending it. It's a huge and enjoyable open-world zombie game that realises that core fantasy well as you explore its corp-infested city, seeing what you can find, picking up missions, and, when all hell breaks loose, making split-second fight-or-flight decisions as you run through streets full of the undead. When the tools and skills you have click, you can enter a total flow state, pivoting on a footfall to avoid danger or leaping from rooftops without first looking. Pretty sure you can fix a problem before it's too late. There are things like a paraglider to fly across buildings and a grapple hook you can fling out with barely a thought. When it all falls into place, you can just sort of wake up blinking at the end of a mission, not entirely sure how any of it happened. Combat can have moments like these too, and features a beautiful two-footed kick that gives Deathloop some competition. The entire first half of the game's fighting is shaped by waiting for the perfect moment to hoof enemies into oblivion. Later though, especially in story missions, the human enemy count increases, and with too many enemies doing too many things at once, the beautiful tactical precision of early fights later becomes more of a desperate mash. The day-to-day existence in the world is great, with plenty to discover and do, but the story, characters, and your ability to change any of it is less impressive. Hardly anyone is likeable or memorable, and the dialogue is all over the place, possibly due to the removal of a big-name writer after harassment accusations.
Fuck that. How many times do I have to say I'm not running a charity?
There are a lot of strange moments where characters clumsily leave an unprovoked backstory into simple fetch requests.
Understood. I'll go report to them.
It's far from ruinous, but it can break immersion and often feels like you're meeting theme park performers trying to keep the show going rather than actual real people living in a real world.
I didn't ask you to test it, only to bring it back. No, it might be useless.
It's also disappointing to discover that your choices have very little impact. The original pitch was that everything you did would have huge and sweeping ramifications for the world. What this actually boils down to is unlocking things like water towers or electrical substations and giving them to one of two factions in return for city upgrades. Give stuff to the police like peacekeepers and you'll add traps and weapons to the streets. Give it to the survivors instead and I'll add parkour gear like zip lines and jump pads. From comparing notes with other players, there only seems to be a handful of decisions that actually lead to slightly different outcomes. A few minor side missions at the start can play out different ways to give the impression meaningful choices exist, but for the most part there's quite a fixed story with some minor cutscene and dialogue changes. Sometimes you can even choose something the game doesn't want you to do and the characters will straight up tell you to do the other thing.
Then pay it forward. Start by apologizing to Anna.
Yes, of course.
The main story through this is unfocused as well. You're looking for your sister you lost as a child and the scientist who experimented on you both. And the only reason you're doing anything in the city is because the people there will help with that. It sort of works as a motivation, but it doesn't really create any emotional link or investment in the world. There are two fighting factions and you're risking life and limb to get involved in a civil war purely because someone might know something about the bad guy.
How could things get any worse? I'll be back in touch when I've got a handle on things.
Despite the scrappy plot and lack of meaningful choices to make, this is still a game that's great to play moment to moment. It just doesn't hold up if you stop to think about why almost any of it is happening. Simply running around, getting into zombie fights, exploring, discovering things and picking up stuff to do is hugely entertaining. It's a big, satisfying world to play in that doesn't quite pull you in completely. We give it 3.5 stars out of 5. Don't forget to subscribe to GamesRadar for more on Dying Light 2.